Thank you all for coming to our seminar on pension funds, financial markets, and land speculation. My name is Luisa Mendonça. I'm a visiting scholar with the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics here at the Graduate Center at CUNY. And I would like to thank you all and also thank the center, Mary Taylor, and the organizations that participated in organizing. Today we had a full-day seminar, so this is the last part of this discussion, and that's part of a larger international campaign to look into the role of pension funds, more specifically TIAA craft in land grabbing. So we have ActionAid, Friends of the Earth, Grassroots International, the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights, several organizations that are part of the campaign, and GRAIN in Canada, FIAN in Germany. So it's an international campaign. So I'd like to thank you all. Also, I would like to let you know that the event is being recorded, and also we have live streaming. So when we have questions, I would like you to ask you to speak at the microphone to help with the transmission of the event. We're going to have presentations about land grabbing in Brazil. We have Fábio Pita, who is with the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights in Brazil, also a postdoc fellow in the Geography Department of University of São Paulo. We have Isolete Wisniewski, who is with the Pastoral Land Commission, the Comissão Pastoral da Terra in Brazil. We have Devlin Kuyek with GRAIN in Canada, and David Harvey, who is a distinguished professor of anthropology and geography, and also director of research at the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics here at the Graduate Center. So I would start just with the overview and try to just set a little bit the context of what we have been working on. We have been looking at this issue of land speculation for about 7 years now. We, at that time, were studying the impacts of the expansion of sugarcane production for ethanol during the so-called ethanol boom, the idea that agrofuels were a solution for climate change, and the negative impacts of expanding monocropping. And then after the economic crisis in 2008, there was a series of mergers of Brazilian agribusiness corporations and oil companies. So mainly oil companies started to gain control of the ethanol market in Brazil. And we were studying specifically the joint venture between Cosan, which is the largest producer of sugarcane in Brazil, and Shell, the oil company Shell. And at that time, then we found out that Cosan had created a subsidiary company called Radar, that was a new type of company in Brazil that had the only purpose of being a rural real estate company to negotiate land, farmland. And at the same time, we realized that after the economic crisis, the price of agricultural commodities was decreasing, but the price of farmland continued to increase. So there was a disconnect between the production of agricultural commodities and the price of land. So we realized that there was a speculative type of business with farmland, and also that coincided with the collapse of the housing market in the US. So some of those financial corporations started to migrate to farmland, to target farmland. We don't like to use the word investment, so we'll rather use the word targeting farmland. Land was being used as an asset independent from the production of commodities. So it didn't matter if they produced soy or sugarcane, but in order to justify the increased price of land, they had to then promote an agribusiness model of agriculture, meaning extensive monocropping, heavily dependent on pesticides, chemical inputs, water, with very serious environmental impacts that they are going to detail. So in that sense, we also realize that usually land functions in capitalism, in the capitalist mode of production as a way to immobilize capital, right? When you buy a house, you can't do anything else with the money, right? Usually, that is the function of land. But because of the deregulation of financial markets in the 90s and the creation of new financial products, derivatives, and so on, then land functions to facilitate the circulation of financial capital. So, for example, in the house crisis in the US, one piece of land could be renegotiated several times in financial markets. So this is how we understand land as a financial asset at this moment. Also, the very notion of property changes in this process because as clients of TIAA, for example, university professors that have retirement plans with TIAA, they don't own the lands, the farms that TIAA buys in Brazil. They don't even know where these farms are. So this is a type of property that François Chesnais calls sorry, is a patrimonial type of property. So it's a different type of private property. What we are saying then is that there is, of course, a huge impact for communities in Brazil, but there is also a risk for clients of TIAA because of the speculative nature of this business, and there is no choice. If you have your pension with TIAA, it's not like you have another choice either. And we are going to present specific cases and the impacts, but in general, just the fact that a huge pension fund like TIAA creates a company called TIAA Global Agriculture to operate in land markets, that already drives speculation. And speculation, meaning the increased price of land, drives displacement of rural communities. And the only model of agriculture that they promote is extensive monocropping. So no matter what they say, that it's sustainable, it's legal, the impacts are severe, right? And that is this general tendency that is associated with the role of pension funds that is kind of the background of what the Isoletti and Fabio and Devlin are going to talk about. So I think we're going to start with Fabio, right?
Okay. Good evening. I'm glad to be here, but to bring you some capitalist social tragedy to you somehow. I'm going to show you some some data. I'm not going to enter into the numbers. You all received the report we are releasing and launching here, and you can go into that further and deeper. So these sorts of investments Maria Luisa was talking about, these investments in land as financial asset, mainly is happening in this Cerrado area. Isolet's going to explain better a little bit more about it, but the main area is in the states in the northeast from Brazil, Maranhão, Piauí, Bahia, and Tocantins. This is like, they call it, the so-called last frontier. It's not actually the last frontier, but it's a frontier place there. And it looks like that. It's composed by high flatlands where soybean production has been entering on the last years with the increase in commodity prices. And with low lands, so they are deforesting this Cerrado area in the highland plateaus because it's flat and able to be mechanized. And the communities use these areas for more than 100 years to herd cattle and collect fruits and hunt. And they don't live there, but it's like their possessions. And they live in the lowlands. It's like, it looks like a plateau with soybean production on the left and with the Cerrado on the right. This is how are the lowlands. And the process is important to understand it as a social process. It's not easy to grasp it. If we just look at the land grabber, the local land grabber, it's easy you are guilty to do that. But we are talking about international financial process of investment that includes also huge pension funds on it. And the most important one is TIAA. So we can think about the process looking to commodities prices over the 21st century. So for us, it's a sort of commodity bubble. In 2003, it starts to grow. After the subprime crisis, it drops. It grows again and starts to fall again in 2011. Sugarcane production expands in the southeast from Brazil. And the numbers, I'm not going to the numbers, but area expansion with the growth of the prices expands, production expands, and productive also expands with mechanization process over the production. This is soybean commodity price on future markets. It follows the trends of commodities in general. And soybean production also followed the trends, follows the trends. Area expansion, production expansion, productive expansion, but after the fall of the prices, area expansion keeps increasing. So we can see a detachment between commodity prices and land prices. So somehow we are talking about a rural land bubble in Brazil, in this area and around. This process is worldwide, but in Brazil is very clear to see it. Land prices increases in the last 10 years, 220%. It's the main asset, even in Brazilian economic crisis nowadays. It's a better asset for investors than public debt, and better than any other investment. This is the graph on land prices in the region, on the northeast of Brazil. So commodity prices are falling, soybean prices are falling, and land prices keeps increasing. And to understand that, we have to think on land as any other regular financial asset. That's what drives capitalism nowadays somehow. with the area expansion and the demand over land, rural land, the prices of land is increasing, and agribusiness enterprises or companies, they start to create other enterprises to invest in land as a separate financial asset. It's important a little bit to understand the scheme because financial foreigner investors, they appear as investors, not as owners of the land. They create joint ventures with Brazilian huge agribusiness enterprises or corporations. And they create specific enterprises to invest only in land. So these are the major ones on the region and in Brazil, Radar, SLC Land Company, and others. Harvard has money there also. And it's important to think on TIAA as the biggest player there. Brazilian agro-industry appear as the owners of the land because they have managers' options, stock options on the enterprises, and foreigners appears as only investors. Even if we are talking about a financial process, and even if we are talking about this process of investing in land, driving the price high, and becoming important asset and an important business. It's how the branches of the enterprises works. TIAA and COSAN partnership in Radar, they create lots of enterprises. They launch debentures on the markets, and one enterprise buy debentures from each other, so they don't seem to be the owners of the land. And I think it's important to think why this region is the target. It's very easy to create a farm from the Cerrado directly. There is no past labor. How many minutes? Okay, I'm finishing. There is no past labor over it. They contract 2 tractors with a big chain and they deforest the Cerrado area. It's very cheap to do that. So the asset is bought in very low price, and the process drives the prices at higher standards, and they can earn profits. Profits is not the conceptual word here, maybe rent. And Radar, this TIAA joint venture in Brazil, is the apex of the process somehow. COSAN, the Brazilian partner, just sold the majority of the stocks from Radar to TIAA. COSAN has only 3% of the enterprise nowadays, and TIAA has 97% of the enterprise, and they appear to be only the investors there. So this is a farm of TIAA in South Piauí, in Brazil, partially deforested. This is like the deforestation process on the last 10 years, or more, 2000. 2008 and 2016. And only to finish, it's only important to say that this process conducts to eviction of communities. The communities, they keep small parts of land. They are dispossessed, but they don't find any more labor because of structural unemployment in capitalist society nowadays. So somehow, it's difficult to say, but somehow it seems to happen there, sort of fictitious production of space or something like that. Rural land is being targeted as a common financial asset. And we are talking about impacts now with Isolete from CPT. Thanks.
Thanks. So Isolete, she's going to speak in Portuguese and I will translate.
Boa noite.
Good evening.
Como vai fazer com o microfone?
Não, você
Eu não sei nada, mano.
we need microphone.
Pronto. Vamos lá. Então, eu faço parte da Comissão Pastoral da Terra, que é uma pastoral ligada à Igreja Católica do Brasil, a Conferência dos Bispos Católicos, que trabalha especificamente com camponeses, né, na sua diversidade nos 27 estados brasileiros. A gente consegue esse alcance praticamente no Brasil todo.
I work with the Pastoral Land Commission, that is part of the Catholic Church. It's from the Liberation Theology Church in Brazil. We work with peasants in their diversity, and we work in 27 states in Brazil. It's a national organization.
Bom, eu deixei um panfleto, se alguém quiser mais informações, tem também o site para buscar informações sobre a CPT.
I have a flyer, I distributed a flyer, you can see more information on our website.
Muito bem. Esse cerrado de que o Fábio começou a falar para a gente, ele está estendido por 8 estados brasileiros.
The Brazilian savanna that Fabio was talking about, encompasses 8 Brazilian states.
E ele tem uma importância estratégica porque ele faz ligação entre os demais biomas, entre os demais ecossistemas brasileiros.
It's very important because it has connections with all the other ecosystems in Brazil.
É um ecossistema bem antigo, a sua formação tende a 40 milhões de anos.
The formation of Cerrado started 40 million years ago.
Por isso, a importância da sua manutenção da vegetação desse bioma.
That's why it's very important to preserve its vegetation.
O problema é que ele já foi devastado mais de 52%.
The problem is that over 52% has been destroyed.
E ele tem uma função estratégica que é a questão, além da sua biodiversidade, da rica biodiversidade entre plantas, entre fauna e flora.
In addition to being an important place in terms of biodiversity of plants and animals,
ele é considerado o berço das águas brasileiro.
Considered the place where the main sources of water start in Brazil.
Sendo que das 12 principais bacias hidrográficas, 8 nascem no Cerrado.
From the 12 main river basins in Brazil, 8 start in the Cerrado, have their springs in the Cerrado.
Ele não é uma formação savânica como na África, por exemplo.
It's different than the African savanna.
Nós temos formações florestais, savânicas e campestres.
We have forests, we have savanna vegetation, and we also have fields.
E a sua vegetação, que é considerado como o primo pobre dos demais biomas,
in Brazil, it's considered like the poor bioma, the poor cousin of the other ecosystems.
Sim, é porque as árvores normalmente são árvores pequenas, com cascas bem grossas e retorcidas.
Because the trees are short and have weird shapes.
E até aproximadamente a década de 70 não era considerado um bioma específico para a produção.
But until the 70s, it was not used for agricultural production.
A modernização da agricultura proporcionou que o capital entrasse nessa região com muita força.
The modernization of agriculture then made that so the capital started to target this area.
Porque sendo uma região de planaltos e a possibilidade de correção do solo facilitou muito a implementação de máquinas agrícolas.
So because there are plateaus with flat areas, then that allows for mechanization.
Isso que causou todo o problema que nós temos hoje nesse bioma.
And that has huge impacts.
Além da rica biodiversidade no bioma, nós temos também uma diversidade de povos nesse espaço geográfico.
We also have a huge diversity in terms of the people who live there.
Que muitas vezes é considerado, tanto pelas empresas como pelo governo, não é considerado pelas empresas e pelo governo. Então, em muitos espaços, algumas organizações e o próprio governo acham que não existe ninguém naquelas áreas.
But these people are invisible. The government and private corporations see the space as empty space.
Essas comunidades são consideradas, principalmente as comunidades tradicionais que ocupam os campos do Brasil, né, o meio rural desse espaço do Cerrado, para nós e para eles mesmos, eles têm uma relação muito diferente com o capital que chega. Para eles, a terra, a água, principalmente a água, a floresta, faz parte da vida deles.
But these communities, they have a very different relationship with the land, the forest, the water, part of their lives.
E eles têm um modo de vida que está sendo completamente impactado por esses projetos que chegam.
And the way of life is being impacted by these projects, the agribusiness projects.
Como o projeto de desenvolvimento agropecuário do Mato Piba.
Such as this agribusiness project that is being implemented in this region called Mato Piba.
Que faz parte. Mato Piba é o início das siglas do estado do Maranhão.
So Mato Piba means 4 states: Maranhão,
Piauí, Tocantins e Bahia.
Yeah, these 4 states.
Sim. Essa região mais acima que está no centro do mapa que estamos vendo. Então, esses projetos chegam de uma forma muito violenta. Como vocês puderam notar, ele é um plano de desenvolvimento agropecuário, colocando o Brasil como um modelo de desenvolvimento a partir da agropecuária.
Yeah, so and these projects are very violent and they are based on the agribusiness model.
Então, as comunidades, além desse processo de impactos diretamente no meio ambiente, afetando principalmente a questão das águas, que no Cerrado, por exemplo, a cada ano nós temos a diminuição de 10 rios, porque o Cerrado, as árvores do Cerrado, ele é considerado uma floresta invertida. As suas raízes são muito profundas e isso facilita com que a água penetre no solo e acumule tanto nos lençóis freáticos quanto nos aquíferos.
So the Cerrado is considered to be an inverted forest because the trees are short, but the roots are very deep. They can go on for many kilometers, and that forms important sources of water and aquifers. And with the expansion of agribusiness, about 10 rivers have been disappearing every year.
Então, retirando essa vegetação e colocando plantas exóticas como a soja, o eucalipto, o algodão, a cana-de-açúcar, ele substitui totalmente, porque são raízes muito pequenas e não tem esse processo do acúmulo de águas. Além do que o solo fica deserto e muito dos sedimentos vai para dentro dos rios, fazendo com que haja o assoreamento dos rios.
So when you expand soy, eucalyptus, or sugarcane, for example, then that destroys the sources of water, and that creates the destruction of the rivers and the desertification of the area.
Sendo que, como eu já falei antes, a cada ano nós temos desaparecendo do Cerrado, nos últimos anos, 10 rios.
So, yeah, 10 rivers have been disappearing every year.
Outra questão que afeta diretamente as comunidades, que muitas delas dependem dessa água para a sua sobrevivência, né? Se você pega, por exemplo, o Buriti, ele depende da água para a sua produção. E são os locais onde ele produz chamado de veredas que estão secando. Um Buriti leva 500 anos para atingir a sua fase adulta.
So, for example, an important tree is the Buriti in Brazil, and because of the lack of water, they are not being able to produce the Buriti, which is a very important tree in the area that takes 500 years to grow.
Imagina a perda que a gente tem com um buriti secando na questão da alimentação da comunidade, na sua produção, porque se retira o buriti, se faz doce, se retira o óleo vegetal para produção, para se usar em casa, mas também para geração de renda.
So, for example, buriti is a very important source of food, but also income for the local communities because they eat, but they also extract the oil to sell in local markets.
O principal problema disso é que o cerrado, a devastação do cerrado, ela é legalizada, porque o Código Florestal permite que se desmate 80% do cerrado e se conserve 80% da Amazônia.
So the problem with the legislation now is that in the Cerrado, you only need to preserve 20% of the land, and in the Amazon, is the opposite, is 80%.
Meu tempo está quase encerrando, mas eu preciso falar dessas comunidades e dessa diversidade que existe, que está sendo fortemente impactado, tanto pela grilagem das terras, como pelo processo que esses projetos que chegam atingem essas comunidades.
So I'm going to finish by talking about the impacts in the local communities.
O uso intensivo de agrotóxicos provoca imensa problemas para as comunidades. E isso acontece nessa região do Piauí, por exemplo, onde o estudo foi feito, as comunidades elas ficam nos baixões. Eu acho que o Fábio já explicou um pouco isso. E os projetos ficam em cima. Então, quando chove, a água desce totalmente com os agrotóxicos e leva diretamente para as comunidades.
So in this case, this area where we did the research, what happens then is that the mechanized agriculture with chemical inputs are in the plateaus, and the communities live in the lower lands. So when it rains, all the pollution goes down with the rain and pollutes the water and destroys the food production of the communities.
E ainda tem a pulverização aérea, que acaba passando por cima das comunidades e o veneno acaba atingindo tanto as suas plantações como as suas florestas, da onde eles retiram o seu sustento, como também a própria pessoa. Então, nós temos muitos problemas de saúde, inclusive com o aumento de câncer nessas regiões.
Also, pulverization with airplanes, fumigation with airplanes of chemicals that have a great deal of impact on public health.
Outra questão é que esses projetos que chegam, muitas das fazendas, hoje nós temos no Brasil um chamado cadastro ambiental rural, em que as fazendas têm que ter uma área de proteção ambiental. Como eles já devastaram todas as fazendas, eles estão registrando a área das comunidades próximas como área de preservação ambiental. Isso é uma sacanagem.
So but these agribusiness corporations, they still have to prove that they have 20% of preserved land, and because they already devastated the flat lands, they are registering the communities where the people live as preserved areas. So that's another form of land grabbing.
O que nós estamos chamando de grilagem verde.
So we call this the green grabbing.
Além disso, muitos dos direitos específicos que essas comunidades têm pela nossa Constituição, como o direito à saúde, à educação, são visivelmente retiradas dessas comunidades. As escolas que deveriam ser garantidas para elas nos locais onde eles vivem, só no estado do Piauí, nos últimos anos, foram fechadas 3.000 escolas.
So other types of rights have been violated. Healthcare, education. Just in this state where we did the study, 3,000 rural schools have been closed in the last years.
E o poder público não dispõe de transporte escolar para levar os alunos para a cidade. Então, ele também é uma maneira de expulsar, porque muitas famílias têm que mudar para a cidade para que as crianças possam estudar.
And there is no public transportation to take the kids to school, so many families have to migrate to the city because the kids cannot go to school in the countryside.
Teve um caso que o Ministério Público Estadual entrou com uma ação contra as famílias porque as crianças não estavam indo para a escola.
And in one case, the public prosecutor actually sued the family because the families were not taking the kids to school, but there was no school.
Então, nós temos todas as questões que não fazem com que essas pessoas continuem no seu ambiente. E muitas delas querem ficar, né? Elas querem ficar nesse espaço que é o território delas, que é a vida delas, que elas constroem nesse espaço. Então, a importância dessas comunidades, tanto para a preservação, porque as áreas hoje, a maioria que são preservadas, são dessas comunidades.
So these communities live in the areas where there is preservation. They keep the preservation, the biodiversity, but because of all these different impacts, many of them cannot live. So there is a direct displacement, but there is this all the forms that force people to leave the land.
Então, para encerrar, essas comunidades, para nós, elas são os guardiões desse patrimônio, que é um patrimônio cultural, social e ecológico.
So these communities are the ones that really preserve this area in the biodiversity and the social relations in this area.
Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to have Devlin next.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So what has been happening in Brazil in the countryside is really not something that's unique to Brazil. As Maisa and Fabio were pointing out, it's part of a larger wave of land grabbing that erupted in 2007, 2008 with the food crisis, with the spike in food prices that happened at that time, and also with the financial crisis. And over the short period of time between about 2008 and 2016, about 30 million hectares of land had been grabbed around the world by foreign companies coming into the countryside in different parts of Africa and Asia, Latin America, also in some countries in the north. And acquiring these lands by hook or by crook, and mainly setting up for the production of export commodities. And the financial sector has been a really key player in all of this. They started looking at farmland in 2000 with the financial crisis in 2008, and where there was a sort of loss of confidence in the stock market, and where a number of these players began looking at alternative investments. And farmland was being presented at that time as a sort of new asset class that these companies could park their money in and could hedge against fluctuations in the stock market, or could look at as a long-term asset, which would, of course, increase in value because of growing demand for food and the finite nature of farmland and climate change and all kinds of other pressures, making it so that this would be a great opportunity for profit if you could get if you can get control of it. And these financial managers who came up with these farmland funds, there was about we tracked by 2012 there was about 120 farmland funds that had been created. They, of course, turn to the places where most of the speculative capital is held, and that's the pension funds. And pension funds, just to give a bit of perspective, the top 20 pension funds in the world have total assets under management of about $10 trillion. This is far above what the sovereign wealth funds have. It's far above what the hedge funds have. So this is the most important source of speculative capital in the world. And there's been a big push to try to convince these pension fund managers that they should be devoting parts of their portfolio to farmland investment. And that push has been what seems like to be increasingly paying off. So over recent years, we've actually seen an increase in the number of pension funds that have started to put money into farmland. Over that same period of going into about 2017, There have been, from what we can gather, so a lot of this information, of course, isn't very well known, but there are at least 80 pension funds across the world who have been started putting money into farmland. The total value of that is about $14 billion. So it's a significant amount of money, and the bad news is that's increasing. So even though the overall sort of wave of land grabbing has sort of ebbed a bit, as a lot of projects have failed, these large, 10,000, 15,000 hectare projects have failed. From the pension fund side, it's actually increasing, and a lot of that is coming from U.S. pensions too. It's important to note. These pension funds are mainly interested in what they would consider low-risk places of investment, so where they say that their land markets are more stable. A lot of the money is going into places like the U.S., some into Canada, some into Eastern Europe, into Australia as a big destination. But there's also a desire on the pension funds to seek, of course, always higher returns. And you get those higher returns in higher risk areas. So the Mato Piba region in Brazil is a key focus for pension funds. And that's why TIAA, the U.S. pension fund, one of the largest pension fund managers, has put so much energy and money into buying farmland in Brazil. Romania is another place. Poland is another place. And in each of these places, what you see is these very well-established pension funds or companies like Rabobank, a very established and so-called respected agricultural lender that has been managing pension fund money. They all have their socially responsible investment guidelines, and they adhere to what they call the farmland investment principles that they concocted. But when you look at what's happening on the ground, what they tend to do is work with local intermediaries who are able to use fraud, to use pressure. In some cases, you could even consider it violence to dispossess people of those lands, to fraudulently acquire some land titles, and then to be able to sell these onward to foreign investors. And this is happening with dramatic impact in Brazil and other countries. So we see that as something that's going to happen more and more. In the U.S. itself, there's not only U.S. pension funds that have been buying farmland here in the U.S., but also foreign pension funds. So you have a mix. And in that span of time, about $5 billion have been invested just by pension funds alone in U.S. farmland. So that's not including a lot of the other financial investors. And there's been all kinds of farmland funds that have been created. There are things called REITs, so real estate investment trusts, that have been created to facilitate this kind of investment in farmland. And if those trends were to continue, and you look at the statistics on how much land will be sold over the next, say, 5 years' time, you can imagine that these pension funds would have the capacity to acquire about one in every five or six farms that comes up for sale in the U.S. Over the next 5 years, which, as far as impacts go for rural communities, as far as impacts go for small farmers or any young farmers wishing to acquire farmland, the impacts are huge. So I think this is something that it's something that's emerging, and the impacts will start to be seen more and more. But it's something to be really aware of, and also to say that the corporate takeover of farmland through pension funds and other investors is very much focused on certain parts of the U.S. So you see it in states that don't have laws preventing corporate ownership of farmland. There are states in the U.S. that do have this. There are 8 or 9 states that have laws preventing corporate ownership of farmland. In those states that don't have that, this is where you're seeing a lot of the investment in farmland. In places like Missouri, California, Washington, Florida, Illinois is a big one. So I'm going to leave it at that. But just to say that this is a trend that really needs to be monitored and watched closely, and that these are pension funds. So what are pension funds? They are workers' retirement savings. There are very few workers who actually have any kind of retirement savings to date. But those that do have their money managed by these financial investors who are doing all kinds of dubious things with this money. And the workers who have their money in there, I think, have somewhat of an obligation to better understand what's happening with their money. But we also should be asking some pretty fundamental questions about how we are allowing our retirements to be looked after by such a financial industry, which is involved not only in farmland, but so many other problematic forms of investment.
Thank you, Devlin. So, David Harvey, please.
Well, first I want to thank you very much for setting this up and for bringing us the documents, pamphlet that you've laid out. I think it's a very, very useful summary and very helpful. It describes the conditions of environmental and social degradation which are associated with some of these processes which are carrying on right now. I'm in a somewhat ambivalent position, of course, because I happen to have a TIAA pension fund. And I always feel terribly ambivalent about this in general. I mean, when the stock market crashes, I go, yay, end of capitalism. And then I think, oh, but my pension fund. And this is actually something that's rather important to look at, which is the double consciousness that many of us have of when we're presented, as we have been presented with the environmental and social consequences, we would say, enough is enough, let's stop all of that. But then, of course, the question arises, well, what happens to my pension fund? And how do we get out of that kind of contradiction in which I have an interest in being in a pension fund, which makes some money. The pension fund has a fiduciary obligation to me to try to maximize its rate of return. And then I find out that maximizing rate of return, or not only by pension funds, but by everybody else, is what the nature of the problem is in terms of the production of inequality, the production of environmental degradation, and the like. This is, of course, one of those contradictions within the dynamics of capitalism that's been around for a very long time. But it also suggests that any kind of real solution to the difficulties and the dilemmas, it's hard to identify at the level of exactly what is happening in, say, this area of Brazil. And just to give you some sort of sense of that, I for family reasons, my wife is from Argentina, and so for many years I would be in Argentina every Christmas for about 30 years. And during that period, there were some very dramatic changes occurring in the agricultural landscape and in their early life. They had a small farm in the south of Argentina. And it was about 20 years ago where I noticed this new crop, which I hadn't noticed. I said, what's that? And somebody said, oh, that's soybeans. I hadn't seen it before. Cultivation down there was wheat and sunflower seeds and corn and things like that. Now it's about 70 or 80% soybeans. And one of the big questions is, well, why this sudden turn to soybeans? And as you see from the maps here, it's largely the soybeans in Brazil, and of course Brazilian planters are invading Paraguay, and Argentina is now very heavily into the soybean trade. Who's buying all of this soybeans? Well, of course, it's China. So what you suddenly find is the rise of China has something to do, the economic superpower has something to do with the incredible increase in demand for soybeans, which makes soybeans so attractive. And I think one of the things that happened after 2007, 2008 was, in effect, China got out of the difficulties of 2007, 2008 rather fast by a huge developmental project which actually helped to revitalize and revive commodity prices around 2010, something like that. And the China boom, as it were, helped save global capitalism from almost total collapse. But that global boom actually meant that the soybean trade was, with a lot of pressure to expand it. Now here is a situation in which you then have something else which has been cropping up in the history of capitalism quite a lot. And actually, this morning I'm a bit of an addict of Bloomberg News in the morning, because you get all kinds of things about what's going on in the financial world. And they had an interview with Schwartzman, who was head of Blackstone, one of the biggest hedge funds, private equity companies that there is around. And in the course of that, he was asked a question about capital, and he said, capital is no problem. There's plenty of capital around. I've never had any problem getting capital. There's plenty of it. He said the main difficulty, he said, is finding projects which can yield a rate of return. And that, he said, is the main difficulty that faces us in Blackstone. And we are constantly searching for new outlets and new ways in which we can actually, and obviously the conventional ways whereby that was taken care of in the 19th century and well up into the 20th century is one thing, but increasingly we find there's a lack of investment opportunities. And so new investment opportunities have to be created. And one of the ways in which that's done is to build totally new markets like carbon trading and things like that, which are not really, they're fictitious markets really. Or to turn something into a commodity and start to commodify it in radical ways. Which happened very much with higher education, and it's happened with medical care, it's happened with housing, and increasingly, of course, investment in housing and property in general started to become attractive. And in the middle of that, as you have clearly pointed out, there arises things, well, we can start to really commodify agricultural land, and we get this process which we're looking at. Now, the thing that I suppose the question I would want to ask is, we can see the roots of this in the way contemporary capitalism is working and the like, and we can start to depict why all of this is going on. We can describe the consequences, as you have described, the environmental and social consequences, and they are appalling. But then we have the issue of, what do we do? And how do we do it? And that poses a set of very interesting questions. Not only are we witnessing the commodification of everything and the financial playing around with the value of everything, we're also seeing, I think, worldwide, the total destruction of an economic basis for agrarian life. What would the people who have been displaced actually do if they have managed to stay there? And I think we're actually even seeing within something like the MST an interesting problem. which is if you say, well, we should occupy lands and try to set up alternative agrarian systems, how viable are those alternative agrarian systems going to be? And I think the MST has been having some problems recently with that question. The rate at which new settlements have been created has dropped off precipitously. I think if you like, the recognition that maybe this is not a viable alternative. And if that's not a viable alternative, then what would be a viable alternative then becomes the question. And every part of the world I go to or know is facing this particular dilemma. And it actually takes some pretty dramatic reconfigurations. For instance, I'm actually in favor of something which would sound terribly outrageous, which would simply be the nationalization of all private pension funds, or if you like, the socialization of all private pension funds. And they should not be about, profit seeking and all of the rest of it. They should be actually funded, much as Social Security is right now, on a pay-as-you-go basis. And they should be associated also with the requirement that it's not only a privileged few who have a pension fund, but everybody should have a pension fund, a universal, if you like, pension right, which in some ways is what the principle of Social Security is, or old age pensions in many European countries, that everybody should have a universal right to some sort of support in their old age, and that should be guaranteed by an economic process in which wealth which is being created today is used today, and there is therefore not this process of speculative engagement with the land and speculative engagement with agricultural production. At the same time as there has to be also a very serious attention must be paid to re-establishing the agrarian base of rural life, not necessarily a traditional peasant life. There are parts of the world where that would be possible, to restore the agrarian base, an economic base for indigenous populations. That is also potentially viable set of propositions. But that agrarian base is being attacked, and it's under global attack, not only by the financial institutions, but by the economy, by the industrialization of agriculture, by the creation of very high yield, low capital forms of agriculture, which make it very difficult for the small scale kind of agriculture to survive. And so we will see this process occurring not only in places like Brazil. If you look at the conditions of, say, hill farmers in Britain, actually a very high rate of suicide amongst hill farmers in Britain. The conditions of labour are very hard. The life is very hard. The remuneration is very low. The social conditions are isolating. And we will find the same thing with what's happening with Korean rice farmers and with Indian peasant populations and the like. In other words, I think what we need to do is to say that contemporary capitalism right now is headed in a direction which is going to render more and more of the population disposable, is going to actually take over almost anything that can be privatized and turn it into private property and turn it into a market form, so that we can have fictitious markets, and these speculative markets in land are really fictitious markets, and actually turn the whole kind of system into something which is so financialized that it really doesn't form an adequate basis for a reasonable kind of life. So for me, the questions that you raise in this pamphlet are profound, and I think the descriptions of what is going on are absolutely essential to be relayed to everybody. But at the same time, we also have to go beyond that and start to think about how to transform the social and economic relations of capitalism in such a way as to make it possible for everybody to have a meaningful life and a meaningful employment, to restore, if necessary, the ecological damage which has already been done, which is very hard to do if you've destroyed all the 500-year-old trees. So these are the sorts of issues which it seems to me this report provokes. And we can talk about certain aspects of that further in the question time. So let me leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we can open for questions now. I think in the microphone, please.
My question is for David, and I would just like to hear more about how these new forms of pensions would work. I don't know very much about how Social Security works.
Well, Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. People working now contribute to a fund which actually supports the people who have retired. So that now it is running into some demographic problems, particularly in Europe and places like Japan, where you have an aging population, where you have a smaller and smaller group of people who are creating the value, if you like, which can be redistributed amongst a larger and larger group of people. So you get some difficulties with Social Security in this country to some degree, though the demographics here are not as severe as they are in Japan. But the principle is that you take, it's people producing today who actually support the people who produced yesterday. And
I understand that, but where does the money go? I mean, as we all pay into Social Security, it's not reinvested somewhere, or it's constantly in circulation?
Well, in principle, it should be constantly in circulation, but there are surpluses, and those surpluses are often used. I would argue that if you reform this right, the surplus would go to things like the production of affordable housing, things of that sort. In other words, you could orchestrate the use of a pension fund. And actually, you would find examples in the past where that happened. Trade unions, for example, would have a pension fund organization, and the trade union would often invest it in the creation of working class housing for the members of the trade union. So that so there are examples in the past of if there is a surplus in the fund, then it can be used for socially progressive purposes, investments in new schools and education and the like. And that doesn't, I mean, obviously that has to be a system that doesn't lose money, but at the same time it doesn't have a fiduciary demand to maximize the rate of return. Otherwise, you do get these crazy situations. We had a student who was working on housing, and CalPERS, the big California pension fund, provided the capital to Blackstone that took over a very, very large housing complex in, I think it was in Oakland. And of course, they turned it from a losing proposition into a profitable proposition by evicting the low-level tenants and then turning it into upper-scale market housing. But it so happened that some of the people they evicted were actually CalPERS pensioners. Now, so this is the kind of contradiction that you've got, that actually the CalPERS pensioners had to, in a sense, agree to their own eviction as a means of supporting their own pension fund, because CalPERS is in a lot of difficulty as a pension fund.
On the one hand, I agree that, as you say, if these institutions could be put under democratic control, as it were, they could seek either socially responsible investments or to not operate as a profit motive in the first place. However, as there wasn't enough time for Fabio and Devlin to point out, but TIAA CREF is not operating alone. They're the main one, but after they set up these new financial instruments, we have several public, government-owned funds, Quebec, Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, several state-level ones. I mean, the work that Grain has done has really covered a lot of those. And from the work that FIAN, as Flavio was showing, and a lot of other people here have been oftentimes running up, getting stonewalled by these public executives. Some of them might say, oh my God, we didn't know, and we'll investigate, and so forth and so on. So yes, there are some mechanisms for that type of democratic accountability, but on the other hand, clearly that has not been enough under the current situations, and there seems to be a tension in our conversation. And so this is not just a question or a challenge to you, David, but it's something that I would also pose to Devlin and to Fabio and to Zolechi and to Maria Luisa, which is, on the one hand, are we trying to reform these capitalist institutions and democratize capitalism? Is that even possible? Is that even coherent? Or are we actually going to find ways to challenge these contradictions and find ways to break the system apart? And what would that look like? I'm wondering, is that a different set of questions than the one that you proposed, David? And from the perspective of the Rede de Justiça Social and from the perspective of Grain, this contradiction that we're running up against in our campaigns, what are ways that we can deal with this? Thank you all.
Anyone who wants to take
Want me to begin? No. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I would appreciate only your question because there's no answer, no easy answer to that. Yeah, you're right, and I think public European funds are investing in TIAA, and they are very important to this process that refeeds itself. Yeah, so they are, most of them they are public, and so we have to think somehow. It brings in mind the question about what capitalism is, because if you are thinking about how to transform it, it should be, we should go deeper on that issue. Yeah, somehow it seems like David said, Professor, capitalism now is very high somehow. Yeah, it's like it's not the end of this sort of society because we are into that, but it's in deep crisis. It's like social and economic deep crisis, and how to get out of it. It's not easy. We have to somehow create together new forms of trying to get out of it. Yeah, it's not constructed. Yeah, I think we should concentrate efforts in trying to define it now. I think capitalism changed a lot in the last years, and it's not established yet. And I don't know if it will be. Maybe this logic of financial bubble determining everything, and social life is going ahead with booms and bursts all around. It's happening everywhere. Yeah, it happened in Chinese stock markets in 2016. It's happening now, and as Professor said, there's no investment for capitalist enterprises or corporations, and yeah, I think the right answer is we don't know how to get out of it, and we must give efforts to debate and discuss that deeper. Somehow, making the financial system more democratic is, for me, not the answer. I think somehow what you are seeing is that I don't know. It's not consensual, of course, but maybe this is the democratization of financial system. What's happening? Yeah? The pension funds are. Who is the owner of the pension fund? Yeah, who is the capitalist there? The managers? I don't know. Maybe I don't think so. Workers have their pensions there, and yeah, it has to do with competition as the core process, and funds are competing against each other, and pension funds are into that. If they don't invest, they lose money and they go into bankruptcy. So we are capitalists somehow. Yeah, it's difficult to accept that, but it's like the workers also became capitalists. So yeah, maybe this is my interpretation of Marx's book Free, when he's talking about the socialization in stock markets of commodity society. And yeah, only to say it's not easy, but it's very important to grasp its contradictions and to try to go further into defining what's capitalism in its core, in its form of society, and what is it nowadays. And we gave up doing that, yeah? If we ask anyone here what is capitalism, maybe people wouldn't be able to define it. So I finish with that.
Can I say so? Yeah. Well, I guess maybe part of the way to think about it is I really wish that these Blackstone and these other financial managers didn't have so much access to capital. I think that's the sort of center of the problem. They have no issue with getting access to money, while so many working people have dwindling amounts of money or drowning in debt. So redistribution is a huge part of that. And how do we redistribute these funds that they have so much access to others? So they don't have to invent all these new ways of developing assets if you start taking some of the money away from them. I think so. Anything that does that is a good move forward. Also, the pension funds or the pension systems that exist in different countries are totally non-viable. They're not credible. We're under a huge illusion that we have any kind of real retirement plan for the coming generations. There's just not going to be enough. There isn't enough retirement savings, or however we're going to call it, for most people. Most people don't have access to any kind of pension right now. And they're constantly trying to shift people away from these the more traditional forms of pensions, which provided you with the kind of guaranteed amount of a wage when you retire, to ones that are really depend on whether or not your investment manager made the right decisions and you got a certain percentage. And the amount that the average working person has to contribute to the pension fund in order to guarantee that kind of sort of 70% of your salary when you get to retirement ages. I think now it's about 30% of your salary you'd have to contribute every year in order to get that. Whereas, 30, 40 years ago, it was 5%. So there's no justification for the current system we have. What Professor Harvey was saying about a nationalized pension system makes far more sense. There's far more credibility of it. Just like in the U.S., you have an argument around public health care and a universal health care system versus a privatized system. And I think, for ideological reasons, that there hasn't been much popular entertaining of the idea of a universal health care system, and maybe that's changing. And I think the same question needs to be asked about the pension systems that we have. And that would be a huge blow, I think, to the financial sector and this kind of, casino capitalism that exists right now.
Just let me add something. I mean, it's been the dream of several Republican administrations in this country to convert the Social Security system into private pension funds. And of course it always gets a bit resisted. They haven't managed to take that. Of course, the politics should be the other way around. And I think you're right. Most of the pension funds which do exist, if they're dedicated in the sense that you retire with 70% of your income or something like that, most of those pension funds, which is CalPERS problem, the California one, are technically bankrupt already. And so you have a state system which will insure the pension fund and will take them over, but it will only pay about, I don't know, half or less than half of what you would otherwise get. So there's a great deal of instability there already. And this, I think, provides certain opportunities. I actually think that, if you said what sort of strategic position should we take, I'm in favor of what I would call sort of revolutionary reforms. That is, by reforming the pension funds, you'd actually cut a lot of the power of Wall Street, because a lot of the power of Wall Street is located in the pension funds. And you would cut the power of finance capital to dictate terms all over the place. So simply by doing something of that kind, you can actually make it has consequences which are pretty far-reaching. And I think we should be thinking about those sorts of revolutionary reforms that allow that to happen.
Yeah. No final, campanha também.
Hi, my name is Luisa. I come from China, mainland China. I stayed the whole day, almost the whole day seminar, and I got to know a lot. But also I learned a lot from today's talks about China. Because I noticed that here, I guess I'm the only one Chinese people. I got all my education in China. And I focused on food studies, food security and food safety in China. But when I try to know what happened, the food safety issues attack the whole country. No matter rural people, no matter peasant, or no matter the urban middle class, everybody is scared because they think Chinese food is not safe. Why? What happened? So I try to look out of the situation out of China. Then I get to know most of the Chinese pig, because pork is a very important food for Chinese to think. So nowadays, pork, almost most of the pork in the market were produced by feeding, the pig were fed by the fodder, the soil fodder. I only got to know this when it was 2015. I study food. I only know since then. It means
Estuda isso.
ordinary Chinese people, you don't know. They don't know how their food
As pessoas na China não sabem.
were produced.
como os-
They don't know Latin American, like Brazil or Argentina, the soil, boom. They don't know that. They just know we can have a lot of meat, but the meat
Só querem
quality,
saber de comer
Claro.
porco, eles não entendem
we
tanto.
want organic one. So when I get to know this, I get to know the China agriculture and the food tradition transformation changed a lot. It's not because things happen inside China.
Tradicional,
It also because
China,
a lot of Chinese transnational capital go out.
capital
Go line.
chinês também.
Why? Because we are scared of how to feed ourselves. But the situation is, in China, as I know, a lot of people who want to organic farm, they believe that with our tradition, agriculture way, we can feed ourselves. We want that type of good food. But the things we couldn't change. We tried to change, but the soil, but the pig, all those things, we couldn't control. Nowadays, organic soil produced in Heilongjiang province in northeast of China.
Agora a gente
Almost
produz
all of those products with high
soja
price
orgânica
export to European countries.
para exportar.
Because Chinese people, they didn't know, they just know the price. Soil imported from Latin America.
E as pessoas na China não têm
They don't know
informação,
the GMO.
sabem nada
So
sobre
this
genéticos.
thing made me think more about, based on David, some of your work translated into Chinese, make me think more about what happened to the food and farming system change in China and out of China. When we talk about environmental crisis, China, I mean, these 20 or 30 years, the climate, the environmental crisis, combined with the food quality decline. It's also ruined the system in China. And now it's getting worse outside of China. When people told me Argentina's soil, GMO soil, produced for China, I feel guilty.
Eu
Because of Chinese people, we don't want that type of food. We want high quality, but we don't know what is happening. So
sinto
for me, I
culpado.
really want to hear a little bit more about this type of thing happening in China. And also, what's the characters of Chinese capital, go out, especially in the initiatives of Belt Road initiatives that President Xi Jinping really pushed forward.
Os projetos de infraestrutura destrutivos também da China. Okay. Maybe we can have a few questions and then we have the panelists answering.
Miriam, I am Brazilian. I belong to the committee Defend Democracy in Brazil here in New York. So my question, I'm not an academic in the field at all. I am a nurse, so I understand about the grab
Eu sou
bodies
brasileira e eu sou
in the
enfermeira.
world of systems. But my question is more or less on this direction because trying to understand that, I already hear about the situation of the pension funds buying, grabbing lands in the Brazilian Cerrado, in the Amazon, etc. One thing that I want to understand,
O que eu não
maybe
entendo.
you can explain to me, is like, okay, so they are grabbing land, but it's not a land, empty land. So it's
Não
a
é
land planted with soy, for example, right? That use a lot of
Não é só
toxic
terra,
products,
é a
right?
soja.
That in the end will impact the life of the communities, the food that we eat, etc., etc. So, if the owners are the pensions why they do not, like she's asking this for China, why they do not, okay, we are the owners of this production, so we want to produce organic, so. You know what I mean? Makes sense what I say or not? You understand my question? Okay, we, TIAA people, we are the owners of this land,
Por que
right?
eles
We are
não
the,
implementam,
are
por
we
exemplo, um
owners of the
sistema
production in the ways of
orgânico
in a way that we say, okay, great. So we are owners here. We want to produce the rice here or the soybeans here, like the MSC, the Landless movement is producing rice, organic rice, for example. Is it possible? Does it make sense?
So maybe we can have one or two more questions and have a round with everyone saying a few words at the end. Okay.
Well, I'm Jorge. I come from a very different discipline, from linguistics.
Eu estudo linguística.
When I hear about land grabbing, I wonder if
Eu entendo
it's
sobre
just
grilagem.
about land,
Sobre
but also about water,
é terra ou também água?
and how water grabbing is related to land grabbing, because for me it's somehow counterintuitive that you get a piece of land to deforest it and to make it to transform it into a desert, right?
Qual o sentido de
Because for
transformar
me,
uma
when you
terra
have
num
land, you have
deserto?
water, you have a source of water. So I would like
Destrói a água.
to
Qual o sentido
have
de destruir isso?
more
E o
information about
impacto
that.
com a água?
And the second is about if this process of land grabbing is also related to some illegal capitals and some illegal enterprises as
Com
drug traffic or whatever.
tráfico de
I mean,
drogas,
what's the link between
a ligação disso com
land and water grabbing and illegal markets and illegal
mercados ilegais? Thank you. So maybe we can have, do you want to start with Evelyn and then I think we need to finish at 8:30, so maybe we have a round and then we see if we have time for a few more questions.
Well, I don't want to answer all the questions. I'll leave it to others to do so. But just quickly, I think there could be very large-scale organic farming done by the pension funds. I haven't seen many examples of that, but it would be like a very industrial organic farming. I don't know if that doesn't fall under my version of organic. But maybe there's some certification systems that would call that organic. I don't know. There's no inhibition to it. I mean, if their market demanded it, they might do this. But in their calculations, that's not what they're doing. And they haven't been interested even in respecting the most basic principles of human life. I don't understand why they would be so interested in organic farming. There are organic funds for investors who do really want to invest in that way. But it's devoid of people, and you're eliminating farmers, so the people who have the connection to the land. So it's not a very stable type of organic farming. The water and land, I think, is very much connected. So outside of, in any place where these land grabs are happening, it's not only for land, it's also for water. So the land grabs are happening in places where there's access to water. And in fact, some companies are coming from countries where their water is an issue. So a lot of Indian companies have been, say, going to places in Africa. There's issues with access to water in India for agriculture, and on that basis, a lot of them has been speculating to buy up and start farming in Africa to be able to then ship food commodities to India. So that's all very much part of the same thing. And drug trafficking too, very much so, or other kind of illegal activities. You have expansion. We were talking with Sergio, I was mentioning this today. In lots of parts of Latin America, you have the use of land grabbing to launder money. So it's a way to sort of legitimize ill-gotten funds. This is driving palm oil expansion in parts of Southeast Asia as well. And, it's not considered illegal, but so much of these land grabs are channeled through tax havens. So it's even if you look at TIAA CREF's structure, I mean, it verges on illegality. They've created this sort of structure that allows them to channel money into Brazil and to evade the Brazilian legislation that restricts investment in farmland by foreign companies. So there's often a lot of illegality that goes on.
Yeah, I would somehow repeat some dabbling words. If you are talking about how capitalism works or functions nowadays, and about land is being used as a financial asset, every sort of investment is going to be driven to land, illegal, legal, yeah. In this area, we have cases of possibilities of enterprises laundering money there, and mafia investments in land, Italian mafia investments in land. It's not official, but we have cases of doing that. And land grabbing is actually not necessarily illegal, the concept in English, but in Portuguese we call it grilagem, a sort of falsification of land title. And it's in the core of this process of land functioning as an asset, because the deal here is to buy cheap and to sell it expensive, yeah? So that's why they are grabbing land in this area, and illegally, because these plateaus areas, they are public, and they should, communities should have the land titles because of tenure rights. They are there for so many years, but entrepreneurs, they go there, they grab land, they expose people from the land. It's expulsion everywhere, violently, with deaths and threats. So they do that illegally, and they falsify the land title. And when the fund goes there to buy the title, it seems that the title is okay, and because it's falsified. So TIAA argues that they do due diligence, that they buy okay titles that are okay. But if you go to Google and if you type the name of the guy that sold land to TIAA, you don't believe what TIAA are telling you. So it's telling you. So yeah, I think Isoletti can talk better about water. We've been discussing that for the past months, weeks, and days. And yeah, I would only somehow, again, tell something that's not consensual, but capitalism and sustainability, they don't work together. So if you have a huge sustainable production, it's like it's going to destroy environment, and it's going to expose people. Yeah, for me, it has to do with the core of capitalism and commodity form, and its contradictions immanent to capitalistic society, as Professor Harvey has written on his book 17 Contradictions of Capitalism. So we are talking about a form of society, very specific one in history of humanity, the only one that's global, or better, it's spatial. Yeah. So again, it's very important to try to define what capitalism is and how it works nowadays, also to be able to think about its suppression. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very difficult to imagine somehow or other that this large-scale industrialized agriculture could be organic. I mean, if you're growing soybeans, you need that, what's that pesticide? Glyphosate or something? What?
Glyphosate.
Glyphosate, yeah. Which is possibly a carcinogen. We don't exactly know, but if you're going to use that, then you've already done a lot of damage to environmental conditions. So I really think the problem here is it's not simply I mean, there is speculation in land values, but I think that TIAA is also very much concerned with what's grown as well, and the profitability of what's grown. And of course, if prices fall, then the only way you can keep the profit rate up is to intensify, which means then you use more fertilizers, and so you get into that kind of cycle, which is a real problem. So I'm not sure that the current structure, because it's going to lead into monoculture, and we mentioned palm oil. Palm oil is a real big problem right now, and even when this is not taken over by these large corporations. Even indigenous forms of agriculture and small-scale production are forced into certain kinds of maximization of the use of the land and of water in ways which can be highly destructive. So I just don't think it's big capital that's destructive and small capital is not, because actually small capital can sometimes be more destructive. I know a little bit about Ecuador, and cocoa farmers are all small-scale producers pretty much in Ecuador, and the environmental and economic conditions under which this is operating is hardly a good alternative to industrial, large-scale agriculture. So I think there's a whole set of questions of this sort of the forms of production of agricultural commodities, which come back to some of the issues that you're talking about, which then, I mean, one of the biggest, I think the biggest land grabbers in Africa are Chinese corporations. And it's mainly not so much pension funds or anything like that. It's the equivalent of sovereign wealth funds and corporate state funds. And you raised the question. I was very curious about exactly how you get past a lot of these restrictions on foreign ownership, which are supposed to exist. Like Argentina has them, Brazil has them, but somehow or other it doesn't stop TIAA getting in, and I'm not quite sure how that's done. So probably it's connected to the money laundering and everything else as well.
A lot of it is done by legalizing it.
By legalizing it, yeah.
Madeline Fairbairn, Senator Cruz, has done really good work.
Okay.
They set up front companies and structures of them.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
the landowner legally owns it.
Yes.
But the money gets channeled through.
Okay. Yeah.
places and
Yeah. Yeah.
it doesn't get
Yeah, I imagine there was some sort of configuration of that sort that would do it. So there's but the question of the food supply and how the food supply is being organized is again something that's very connected to this whole question of the organization of agricultural production and what it's about. I mean, in Ecuador, we worked a bit with about 60 or 70% of the fresh fruit and vegetables, keto comes through indigenous markets. The government is trying to destroy the indigenous market so that everything goes through the supermarket. Now, the supermarket imports goods, vegetables from California and from Europe. The indigenous markets are actually growing things, you know, in traditional fashion. And yet the government policy is very much about somehow or other, in part because the main indigenous market is in high rent location and they want to build a Hilton hotel right next to the old colonial city, which is where, you know, this is the kind of thing that's going on. I found it impossible to understand why the Ecuadorian government, which has a constitution which supposedly acknowledges the significance of indigeneity and plural ethnicity and all the rest of it, would be destroying the agrarian base of that in favor of an import and export sort of structure and the WTO and all of that kind of thing, and getting tomatoes that don't taste like tomatoes from Holland and celery from California, and you kind of go, this is irrational. Actually, I mean, it's mad. I mean, it's insane, and you kind of go, why is this happening? And yet it seems there is a process at work which is driving this sort of process on. And you see it in Brazil and Argentina, in Ecuador, you see it everywhere. And you kind of go, well, you know, we've got to find some way of saying enough is enough. We've got to actually find a way to stop this. And actually get back to some sort of sensible way of using the environment and building sociality and all the rest of it in ways that are not caught up with this onward march of capital accumulation through financialization and the transformation of everything into the commodity form and the profit seeking which goes with it. So, you know, this is where we're at right now.
I'm just going to say a few words before Isolete to explain this a little bit. TIAA created 3 companies, Radar, Mancilla, and Telos. There are facade companies, Brazilian companies, but the main source of funding comes from TIAA. So they go around the law because it seems that these Brazilian companies are the ones negotiating land, but the main source of funding is actually TIAA. So that's how they go around the law. In terms of the agricultural model, this was actually war technology that was transferred into agriculture in the 50s, right? We had a crisis of overproduction in financial markets. At the same time, we had machines, chemical weapons that then were transferred into agriculture as chemical inputs, pesticides, and were internationalized all over the world through the so-called Green Revolution. So the U.S. used food as a weapon, first by controlling the market, the world market of food, dumping food, the food aid projects, and then first exporting food and flooding the markets to Germany, to Japan, but also to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was very much dependent on food from the U.S. And then the second stage after the crisis in the 70s was the export of capital, meaning agribusiness corporations creating subsidiary companies in several parts of the world. Brazil, Chile, Mexico were some of the key ones. So it was a whole agricultural model based on the idea that this would bring, would end hunger, would bring peace, you know, the neo-Malthusian type of mentality. But that doesn't mean, but you know, when you look actually at the data, it's not more productive. It doesn't produce more food. It's not cheaper because it relies on, very high amounts of capital for machinery, it's all based on oil, right? The chemical inputs. It destroys the soil, so the productivity goes down. That demands more investment in constant capital in machinery and infrastructure and all of that. So it was a whole myth, that was created to expand this food system internationally. And I think this is what we need to break with this idea that this is the only food system that is viable. At the same time, everywhere, the data about the production of foods, local food and food for subsistence is totally invisible, usually from official data. In Brazil, for example, when they do the census, they go to ask farmers what they produce. They usually just show the production that they sell in the market, for example, corn. But then you see, but you have fruit, you have vegetables, you have animals. This is invisible. Nobody is actually counting that type of production for subsistence that is not just for the producers, but for the whole community and for the local markets. That's not counted everywhere, but it's a very important part of the economy in every country. And I mean, China, of course, was historically, food security. In all the other countries, this is key. This was key for the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and it's key and was a key part of the foreign policy of the United States after the war. And it continues to be a key piece of the way the U.S., as a player in the world. And then just to say a few things about the campaign, I think, of course, we need to understand those things from a theoretical perspective, from a global perspective. But in terms of what to do, I think we need to go step by step, right? We know we need to transform the food system, right? We need to transform social relations in capitalism. But what can we do, right? Because sometimes it's important to have the global analysis, but we can't have the same analysis when we say what to do. So, we are trying to look at these contradictions, and as clients of TIAA, just put pressure on. So how can we shame the company, right? They have an image. They present themselves as a socially responsible investor. So how can we shame that? How can we spread the word? What types of contradictions we can find? So I'm not going to go into details, but this is the discussion we're going to have tomorrow. We have been doing this for several years now, and so I think we have concrete steps that we think can put a pressure right now. So just to put this out there, that I think one step at a time is the way to go in terms of the reformers' revolution, right? That David Harvey was proposing. So, so Isolete, you're gonna.
O que você falou que eu posso falar? Então, eu acho que o professor foi muito claro que a mudança ela vai ocorrer quando a gente tiver essa mudança de modelo de agricultura.
So it's very clear, like Professor Harvey said, that we need a different food system.
Mas no Brasil, muito se fala de que é uma nação muito diversa e é impossível construir um país, nação, numa diversidade tão grande.
In Brazil, we are very diverse and it's a large country, and some people think that how can we transform things in such a diverse situation?
Mas as comunidades elas vêm desenvolvendo um processo que pode ser uma experiência local, mas que traz grande aprendizado para nós dentro dessa imagem de nação.
But the local communities, although they are very diverse and they have local experiences, if we put that together, we can imagine a different type of a nation.
São os territórios garantindo a sua autonomia ou o que elas estão chamando de autogoverno.
So in their territories, they are self-governing themselves.
Não só a partir da sua etnia ou da sua diversidade de identidade, mas com outras identidades de comunidades tradicionais, por exemplo.
Not just within their own communities and identities, but exchanging with other types of communities as well.
E conseguem manter essa relação com a zona urbana.
And they're also reaching out to communities in urban areas.
Numa convivência harmoniosa.
And try to create harmony within that.
Que não conseguem com os grandes fazendeiros e aqueles que querem tirar o lucro máximo da terra, da água e das florestas.
And they see that there is something in common against the large agribusiness that just see profit and destroy the land and the water.
Eu acho que a grande diferença que nós precisamos cada vez mais pautar, e eu acho que a universidade tem um papel importante, é os conceitos que se tem dentro disso do que o capital tem.
So I think the university has an important role in understanding those concepts.
O capital chega de uma forma muito violenta.
The violence of capital.
Retira a vida.
Violence against life.
Retira a sua cultura.
Culture.
Desenraiza a vida, desenraiza essas pessoas.
So these people have no roots anymore.
E joga elas para a periferia.
So they are expelled to the periphery of the cities.
No modelo perverso que o Estado tem que garantir a habitação para essas pessoas.
And then the state has no capacity to guarantee housing for them.
Sendo que mantendo ela no seu habitat, no seu território.
Because when they were at their territories,
poderia gerar muita economia.
That could be positive for the economy.
Para as comunidades, a natureza, a terra, a água, as florestas, os animais, eles fazem parte de um bem comum.
Because they see the biodiversity, water, as part of common, bem comum. The commons, right? Yeah.
Ao contrário do capital que vê esse espaço como um recurso que pode ser explorado de qualquer forma ao seu bem prazer.
So it's different from a capital that sees this as a source of exploitation.
Para gerar aquilo que é mais importante para ele, que é o lucro.
Just for profit.
Eu acho que os exemplos que são trazidos aqui, quando a gente fala da disputa que você traz pela questão da água, a disputa do território é a disputa pela água hoje, que vai ser considerado o ouro do nosso século.
Yeah, when we have dispute for land, there's also dispute for water.
Tanto que o capital, quando fala no cerrado, fala das terras planas para poder plantar, como também da questão da água em abundância.
So the cerrado became a target because it has flat land and also is very rich in terms of water sources.
Por isso o interesse do capital financeiro por essas áreas também.
That's why financial capital has an interest.
E das grandes corporações como a Nestlé e Coca-Cola que têm o domínio da questão da água no mundo.
And also Nestlé, Coca-Cola that control water sources all over the world.
Eu acredito que assim como a terra, a água também vai virar um ativo financeiro.
So water is also a financial asset.
Então a importância da gente perceber que há algo diferente a partir dessas comunidades que resistem em se adaptar a esse modelo do capital.
So there is a lot of resistance and there is something new that these communities are building.
E a importância da gente dar visibilidade e mostrar cada vez mais essas experiências que são desenvolvidas pelos pequenos.
So it's very important to give visibility to these experiences that are being developed by small farmers.
De que essas comunidades elas tenham garantido o seu território, que para elas é uma forma de existência.
Because their territory is what guarantees their lives, their existence.
Ou como eles mesmo dizem, resistir para existir.
So they say resist to exist.
Okay.
Thanks. So thank you all for coming. And so you all have the materials, the report, and we hope to keep in touch. So this is a campaign that we're going to continue working on, and I hope that you can be more involved. And thank you all, all the panelists. Thank you very much.